The year was 1330 before Christ. In the sacred heart of Thebes, Egypt bloomed under the sun god's rule, with gold flowing like water and temples echoing with hymns to Aten. But behind the alabaster walls of the noble estates, another kind of ritual unfolded, one that turned daughters into prisoners. It was called a wedding, and for a girl named Kiya, it began with perfumed blessings, silk garments, and a silent smile from her mother. By the time the ceremony ended, no one would call her by her name again. Kiya had not yet seen 16 summers when the messenger came. His linen was white, crisp as his tone, and his words cut through the morning stillness like a blade through papyrus. Her father dropped to his knees. Her mother wept, not from sorrow, but pride. "You have been chosen," the messenger said, "by Lord Nepheren, counselor to Pharaoh Akhenaten." It was not a question. It was not an invitation. It was a verdict. That evening, Kiya sat alone beneath the date palms while servants whispered and counted coin. Her future was being bartered while she stared into the Nile, wondering if her reflection would look back the same tomorrow. Nepheren was a name she had only heard in the mouths of men, spoken with caution, swallowed with fear. He was older, widowed, and wealthy. Kiya had never met him, but she was told it was an honor beyond all dreams. That night, her mother came to brush her hair. Each stroke was slower than the last. "Don't shame us," she said softly, "and you will be safe." Kiya wanted to ask what safe meant, but the question stuck in her throat, like sand. The next morning, her old tunic was gone. In its place lay a white linen robe embroidered with gold thread, the kind worn only by noble brides. Her sandals were new, unworn. Her favorite necklace, handmade beads from childhood, was taken away, replaced with a heavy lotus pendant she could not remove without help. It felt less like dressing for a wedding and more like shedding a skin. Outside, the chariot waited. Her father stood straighter than she'd ever seen him, and her mother's hands trembled as they adjusted Kiya's veil. When the temple priest blessed her with oil and silence, Kiya didn't cry. She only looked back once, at the door she would never walk through again. It closed without a sound. They said it was tradition, that every bride of noble blood must be purified before her wedding, so the gods would smile upon the union. But as Kiya stood naked beneath the temple ceiling, surrounded by veiled women holding jars of thick oil and buckets of goat's milk, she wondered if the gods ever wept. The chamber was quiet, save for the dripping of water and the low chants of the priestesses. Her hair, once long and dark and brushed by her mother's hands, now lay in pieces on the cold limestone floor. It had been shaved without warning. A blade to the scalp, and then silence. The chief attendant, an older woman with skin like cracked alabaster and eyes that never blinked, rubbed her scalp with myrrh and placed a linen cap over it. "Your past must be removed," she whispered, "so your new life can begin." But Kiya felt no beginning, only erasure. She tried not to flinch as the women bathed her body, scrubbing away dirt, scent, and memory. They spoke no words, only gestures. When one of them touched the scar on her ankle from a childhood fall, she lingered a moment, then smeared it with clay until it vanished beneath a painted cover. Kiya realized then that every mark of who she was would be hidden, until even her own skin was foreign to her. They poured perfumed oil along her shoulders, thick and heavy. Her body was now property, and it had to be preserved like a relic. When they dressed her, it was not in a robe, but in strands of translucent linen stitched with gold thread. The fabric revealed more than it concealed. She looked down and saw a body she no longer recognized. They clasped her wrists in thin bangles etched with symbols she couldn't read, and tied a sash of blue around her waist, a color reserved for the wives of nobles. One attendant painted her lips with crushed carmine, the other lined her eyes with kohl. They did not ask her if she wanted it. No one had asked her anything since the messenger arrived. At last, they led her to a mirror of polished bronze. The girl who stared back at her had no name, no past, no voice, only obedience. "You are now she of the house," said the priestess. "You will not speak your old name again." Kiya opened her mouth. but no sound came. She stepped back from the mirror, heart racing, as if she were looking into a tomb. In a way, she was. The sun rose without warmth on the day of her betrothal, its light slipping through the temple columns like a knife through silk. Kiya walked barefoot across the cold stone floor, her anklets chiming softly with every step. They had stripped her of everything, her name, her clothes, her voice, but not her fear. That they had left untouched. In the chamber of vows, she stood beside Lord Nephirin for the first time. He did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on the high priest, who chanted words older than the pyramids, invoking gods who had long since stopped listening. Nephirin's robes were thick with gold, layered with lapis and turquoise, and smelled faintly of frankincense and blood. Kiya had to tilt her head to see his face. His skin was lined, his beard oiled and shaped like a blade. He did not smile. When the priest asked her to speak her oath, Kiya's mouth opened, but the voice that came out felt like it belonged to someone else. "I am she of the house," she said, reciting the words they had carved into her soul. "I vow silence, service, and seed. The 3 pillars of marriage in noble Egypt be unseen. Be obedient, bear children." The priest nodded. A scribe nearby dipped his reed into ink and recorded the moment on a scroll, marking the time with a symbol that looked more like a tomb than a blessing. But he did not write her name. There was no space for it. Only Nephrin's lineage was preserved. She would exist only in footnotes, his wife, the mother, she of the house. Her name, once whispered with affection by her mother and shouted across rooftops by her brothers, was never spoken again. When the ceremony ended, Nephirin placed a heavy ring on her finger. It was cold, sharp at the edges, and too large for her hand. She could feel its weight pressing into her skin like a warning. The priest turned to the gathered witnesses, advisors, nobles, servants, and temple scribes. "She has been claimed," he announced. The room did not applaud. Applause was for joy. This was duty. Kiya turned her head slightly, trying to find her mother in the crowd, but the faces blurred together in still silence. No one met her gaze. She had been given away, and now she was being forgotten in plain sight. As Nephirin turned to leave, she followed a step behind him. As instructed, the new position felt strange. The girl who once ran through market stalls and leapt over rooftop ledges now walked like a shadow, behind a man she did not know, toward a future she had not chosen. Her name remained in the temple that day, echoing once inside her mind before the silence swallowed it whole. The streets of Thebes were lined with petals and expectation, yet Kiya felt only the weight of invisible chains. Her wedding march began at the temple gates, beneath the painted gaze of gods who offered no mercy. Trumpets did not sound. Drums did not echo. Only the dull thud of the chariot wheels and the silent stares of the crowd followed her down the path. She sat stiffly inside the open chariot, hands folded in her lap, face painted into stillness. Her veil concealed everything but her eyes, but even they were not her own anymore. They belonged to the ceremony now. Children were told to look upon her as an example. Girls whispered of one day being just like her, but Kiya felt no pride, no honor. She felt like an animal being paraded before slaughter, dressed in gold, bound in silk, and stripped of will. Her body sat, but her mind floated somewhere above, watching this cruel performance unfold like a story she had no part in writing. Her father walked beside the chariot, eyes straight, lips tight. He looked neither proud nor ashamed, only relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. Her mother was absent, left behind at home. Tradition forbade mothers from walking their daughters into marriage. It was said to bring sorrow. Kiya wondered if sorrow had already arrived and simply taken her place. As the chariot passed the edge of the market, familiar faces emerged, women who had once bought her cloth, boys who had once chased her through alleyways. Now they stood silent, heads bowed, afraid to meet the gaze of a girl no longer their equal. A priestess followed behind on foot, chanting prayers to Hathor, goddess of love and fertility. But the words felt hollow, floating into the hot air and vanishing before they reached the gods. Kiya tried not to cry. A single tear could be seen as a curse. So she focused on her breathing, counted the turns of the wheels, and gripped the edge of the seat until her knuckles burned. At the end of the procession stood the estate gates tall, carved with hieroglyphs, guarded by soldiers in leopard skin sashes. When she arrived, they opened without ceremony, swallowing the chariot in one smooth motion. Inside, the courtyard smelled of incense and old stone. Servants lined the path, kneeling as she passed. No one spoke, no one smiled. The chariot stopped at the steps of the inner sanctum, where Lord Nepheren waited. He did not offer a hand. She was expected to descend on her own. She did, slowly, knees shaking, eyes forward. The veil slipped slightly as she moved, but no one reached to fix it. She was no longer a girl to be protected. She was a possession on display, and like all possessions, she was expected to endure. They called it a gift, a golden anklet, delicately carved, warm from the sun, shaped like a lotus blooming in mid-step. Servants held it on a folded cloth of blue linen, heads bowed as they presented it to Lord Nepheren. He nodded once, and with a gesture that was neither cruel nor kind, motioned for Kiya to lift her foot. She obeyed, the metal clasped around her ankle with a soft click. It was light, elegant, and impossible to remove without a key. The key, she would learn, never left Nepheren's side. From that moment, she could no longer leave the estate unaccompanied. Not without permission, not without the guards reporting to him. It was spoken with smiles, explained as tradition. Noble wives were too precious to walk freely, too honored to mingle with the noise of common streets. But Kiya felt the truth in her bones. The anklet was not a gift, it was a lock disguised as luxury, a boundary carved in gold. Her first steps in it were measured. The metal rubbed slightly against her skin with each movement, reminding her with every shift of her weight that she belonged to someone else now. The sensation never left. In the estate's inner garden, she watched other wives move in silence, each bearing their own golden shackle on ankle, wrist, or even around the throat, depending on the husband's temper. They wore them like jewelry, but none of them smiled. One woman, older and pale from years in the shade, warned her without words. Just a glance, just a flicker of pity. That night, when Kiya sat in her new chamber, she tried to remove the anklet, just to feel her own skin again. Her fingers found no seam, no clasp, only the cold smoothness of something meant to stay. A servant entered with a bowl of pomegranate seeds and a jug of rose water. She said nothing, only bowed and placed the tray down. As she turned to leave, Kiya whispered, "Does it ever come off?" The servant paused. Her back remained turned. "Only if he wishes," she said quietly. Then she disappeared behind the curtain. Kiya looked down at her ankle, now swelling slightly from the heat, her own skin already darkening beneath the weight of obedience. Somewhere in the courtyard, a flute played softly. Doves cooed from their cages, and behind the walls, guards paced like shadows. She was not chained to a wall. She was not locked in a dungeon. But the message was clear. Her freedom had not been taken violently. It had been gifted away, in gold. The wedding feast was a spectacle of silence. Musicians played delicate notes on lyres and flutes. Dancers moved like river reeds in the wind, and slaves poured wine into gold cups that Kiya was not allowed to drink from. She sat beside Lord Nepheren, slightly behind him, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap like a statue carved for display. Every smile was forced, every glance rehearsed. She chewed the sweet fig pastries with no appetite, her stomach tight with dread. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she was well. It was not expected. A wife's presence was ornamental. Her silence was proof of worth. When the final course had been cleared and the guests filed out in a slow, graceful procession, Lord Nepheren rose. "She will rest," he said to a servant, not bothering to look at her. Kiya stood when he did, following his movement with her body as she had been taught, but instead of leading her to his chamber, he turned away. His steps echoed down a corridor lined with painted gods. He did not say good night. He did not say anything. The servant bowed and gestured for her to follow. They led her through a smaller passage this time, away from the garden and the perfumed air, into the quiet bones of the estate. The halls here were dimmer, older. The torchlight flickered across walls that had not been painted in years. Finally, they stopped before a thick wooden door, carved with lotus petals and bound with bronze. The servant unlocked it with a key pulled from his sash. "This is yours," he said. His voice was soft, but distant, like someone reciting a line too many times. Kiya stepped inside. The room was larger than she expected, but cold. There were no windows, only narrow slits near the ceiling for air. A bed of cedar sat in the center, surrounded by sheer linen curtains, a basin in the corner, a low table with a single oil lamp already burning. Nothing more. When the door shut behind her, it did so with a finality that hollowed her chest. She walked to the center, stood still, and waited for something. A knock, a footstep, anything. But nothing came. She was alone. The gold anklet dug into her skin as she sat on the edge of the bed. She traced the pattern of the linen, but the threads offered no comfort. She tried to lie down, but the silence pressed against her ribs. She whispered her name to herself once, just to remember what it sounded like. It barely reached the wall before it vanished. Somewhere beyond the thick stone, the estate breathed without her. And in that moment, she understood what no priest or mother had dared to say. The wedding had ended, and the sentence had begun. If stories like this speak to something you feel but cannot name, subscribe so they are never buried in silence again.